I ask unanimous consent that the following senators be permitted to speak prior to the scheduled roll call vote. Senator Van Hollen for up to 10 minutes, Senator Durbin for up to 2 minutes, Senator Risch for up to 5 minutes, and Senator Sanders for up to 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to oppose the transfer of over $675 million of U.S. taxpayer money to finance 1,000-pound bombs and 20,000 fully automatic rifles and other offensive weapons to the Netanyahu government. The humanitarian situation in Gaza has gone from horrible to hell on earth. Yesterday, we reached the grisly marker of over 60,000 people killed in Gaza, over half of them women and children, and the number could be much higher. More than 133 people have died of starvation, over 80 of them children, most of them this month. Experts have been warning about the threat of famine in Gaza for months, ever since the Netanyahu government imposed a total blockade on all humanitarian assistance going into Gaza on March 2nd. This is a man-made, preventable crisis, and the solution is clear. The Netanyahu government must immediately allow the UN-led distribution system to resume delivery of aid into Gaza to avert a full-blown famine. I have long said that Israel is completely justified in its war against Hamas, which murdered over 1,200 people and seized over 250 hostages on October 7th. And we must not rest until every remaining hostage comes home, and there must be no more October 7th. But the Netanyahu government is not justified in imposing collective punishment against all of the people of Gaza to pay for the sins of Hamas. And yet that is what is going on as it uses food and humanitarian aid as a weapon of war. There are now 500,000 people facing famine-like conditions in Gaza, but they're not just numbers. Colleagues, this is an awful, awful picture. But we have to look at what's happening in Gaza. This is baby Zainab. She weighed 6.6 pounds when she was born 5 months ago. She was 4.4 pounds when she died a few days ago. Her life could have been saved with a special type of baby formula, but none of that formula can be found into Gaza. It wasn't let in. For months, the Netanyahu government has been blocking thousands of truckloads of life-saving aid that could save babies like Zainab. And yet, the Netanyahu government is denying what every human being can see, and they're denying the humanity of people suffering. Just 3 days ago, Benjamin Netanyahu said, and I quote, "There's no starvation in Gaza." Even Donald Trump, who's given Netanyahu a blank check, called out that lie. He said, "There is real starvation in Gaza. You can't fake that." The World Food Program says it has enough food to end the crisis, but the Netanyahu government won't let them deliver all of it. And last week, they blocked almost half of the aid convoys that the WFP requested permission to bring in. On July 27th, the editorial board of Haaretz, Israel's longest-running newspaper, wrote simply, and I quote, "Gaza is starving and Israel is responsible," unquote. This chart from the Wall Street Journal tells the story. As you can see, back here in March, the Netanyahu government imposed a total blockade for months on all food and humanitarian aid entering Gaza. After several months, they began to let a little trickle of aid in, but they did not allow the deliveries to resume through the tested distribution system that had been run by the United Nations and supported by trusted organizations like the World Food Program. Instead, they replaced it with an organization that goes by the name of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, but there is nothing humanitarian about it. It is a shadowy private organization backed up by mercenaries and the IDF. The food distribution blocked by Israel had over 400 aid distribution points. The GHF operation has only 4, and they're not always open. The operation has become a death trap. When you have 4 sites to feed 2 million people, it's not surprising that thousands of desperately hungry people are surging to get what they can. And as they have surged, it's well documented that many have been shot and killed, sometimes by GHF security contractors, more often by IDF forces. The UN Secretary General said, and I quote, "Any operation that channels desperate civilians into militarized zones is inherently unsafe. It's killing people," unquote. That should be obvious to all of us. And yet the Trump administration is using $30 million of US taxpayer money to fund that death trap. And it's sending more taxpayer dollars to fund bombs to the Netanyahu government to continue the devastation of Gaza. Colleagues, this must end. The Netanyahu government must immediately allow tested UN distribution systems to resume operations and quickly surge food to starving people. It's important to note that the Netanyahu government claimed it was replacing the UN distribution system because Hamas was systematically diverting food intended for civilians for its own purposes. From the start, that was a pretext and a big lie. The UN distribution system had strong safeguards to prevent any significant diversion to Hamas, and they were working. Cindy McCain, the WFP, said her organization saw no evidence of any effort of Hamas to loot aid trucks. Israeli military officials told the New York Times in a story in just the last couple of weeks there's no such proof. In fact, they said, and I quote, "The UN aid delivery system was largely effective in providing food to Gaza's desperate and hungry population," unquote. An internal U.S. government analysis that just came out in the last few weeks found no evidence of systematic theft by Hamas. That was also the testimony of the former U.S. Special Envoy for Humanitarian Issues, David Satterfield. So why did Israel dismantle a system that was kind of working and replace it with one that's killing civilians as they try to get food? The simple reason is also horrifying. It's that the Israeli government wants to use food as a weapon of war and for population control. They opened 4 aid sites, mostly in the south, to displace Palestinians and move more in that direction. The Israeli government is trying to herd the Palestinian people into concentrated enclaves as a prelude to pushing them out of Gaza entirely. It's not a secret plan, colleagues. It's been right out there in the open. In fact, in February of this year, President Trump said he wanted to remove Palestinians from Gaza. And the Netanyahu government and the prime minister himself embraced the plan, which, by the way, had been previously proposed by members of his right-wing coalition. In fact, recently his heritage minister said, as others have quoted, that the government was, quote, rushing toward Gaza being wiped out and driving out the population. Colleagues, this is part of a coordinated campaign by the Netanyahu government, a government that has declared the removal of Gaza's population as a strategic goal of the war. That is ethnic cleansing by any other name, supported by American taxpayer dollars. The extremists in the Netanyahu coalition do not just have their eyes set on Gaza. As we speak, Israeli settlers are encroaching further and further into the West Bank, killing more and more Palestinians who live there. It's important to note that one of the arms sales we're discussing is the transfer of 20,000 fully automatic rifles to the Israeli National Police, headed by one of the most extreme members of the government, Ben-Gvir, somebody who handed out rifles to settlers a little while ago without having any idea where they're going. On top of that, back in February, President Trump suddenly revoked all U.S. sanctions against extremist settlers in the West Bank that had been put in place by the Biden administration. And that sent a terrible message. In just the first 6 months of this year, we've seen the highest rate of settler attacks in years. One of those happened on July 11th, when violent settlers beat to death a 20-year-old Palestinian-American citizen from Florida while he was visiting his family. His name was Saif, and he's the 7th American citizen killed in the West Bank since January 2022, and the 5th in just the last 19 months. Some killed by Israeli settlers, others by Israeli security forces. Just this week, a Palestinian activist who helped make the Oscar-winning documentary, No Other Land, was shot and killed by a violent settler who had been sanctioned under the Biden administration, the sanctions that the Trump administration withdrew. And meanwhile, on July 23rd, just a week ago, the Israeli Knesset approved a symbolic resolution that supported annexing the entire West Bank, a place where 2.7 million Palestinians live. Colleagues, for decades, peacemakers on both sides have hoped to make the West Bank and Gaza a foundation for a Palestinian state. We need to make sure that we don't support these efforts that undermine peace and security in the region. Children are starving before our eyes. Colleagues, if ever there was a time to act, it's now. It's overdue, but let's act now and support the resolutions put forward by Senator Sanders. I yield the floor.